All right, Shalom. First and foremost, want to give all praises to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakakudash, double honor to the elders and apostles, great most on the time this truth, and Shalom to the hopeful elect scattered across the four corners of the globe. All right, that remnant that was prophesied to return in these latter days to the obedience of the scriptures and the true names of the Heavenly Father and His only begotten Son, Yahweh, Yahweh Shai. And briefly in this lesson, I want to touch on an important topic. Want to touch on the transition from, the SWIFT banking system to the new, blockchain-based banking system, that they're looking to implement on a global scale. When you consider these central banks, the IMF, the World Bank, the Federal Reserve, these major financial institutions that are pulling the strings, we can clearly see, okay, that they're trying to get us from one place to another. All right, they're trying to get us from one system to another system. What they call, the legacy system. All right, and like Charles Schwab always talks about, all right, the Great Reset, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And in order to do that, they're causing conflict. All right. And that conflict is what we're seeing, between Russia, Ukraine. And in the midst of that, all right, they're going to finagle their way into, crypto and blockchain being established, all right, on a global scale. All right. And when you watch the news, all right, something we're constantly seeing is the threat of Russia being taken off of SWIFT. All right, which will have major implications. All right, it will have a major, impact on the economy. All right, on goods and services, being offered in America, in the U.S. and beyond. All right, and it'll also have a very huge geopolitical impact as well. All right, between the relations between America, all right, and its allies. All right, and that's all biblical prophecy, and it's beautiful to see it all, come together, because it makes perfect sense. It's the only thing that makes sense. All right, so I want to touch on a few scriptures real quick. All right, this is Revelations 13. I'll read the first two verses. It says, this is John the Revelator on the island of Patmos, receiving a vision, going into these times that we're living in right now. It says, and I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. All right, and we know this verse to be talking about, the establishment of NATO. All right, and the EU. All right, the European Union. All right, and when you consider NATO is essentially the greatest military alliance, the most powerful military alliance ever to be established on the planet Earth. And then on the flip side of that, you have, basically the greatest, economic alliance ever established, in the European Union. And these are the two, primary entities, that are controlling, global trade, politics, monetary policy, that is all being facilitated, through NATO and the EU. Let me go to the next verse. It says, and the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear. All right, and that's the point I want to grab in verse 2, because really what it's doing is it's hinting to the beginning, all right, of Edomite rule, Edomite dominance on the planet Earth, which started with the Greeks, and you can read that in the book of Daniel, all right? You can also read about that in First Maccabees. And then it says, let me read it again. It says, and the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, right? So that leopard represents, the Greeks, Alexander the Great. And his feet were as the feet of a bear, all right? And we know that bear to be the Russians, all right? And then, when you consider the head of something, the head is the beginning of something, all right? And the feet is the end of something, all right? The feet is, the last part of your body, beginning with the head, all right? So the scriptures are already, you know, letting to the ones who have eyes to see and ears to hear, the scriptures are letting you know that the Russians are going to be the end of Edomite rule on the planet Earth, and we're seeing the beginning of that. All right. Ultimately, Russia is going to be responsible for the downfall of Babylon the Great, along with, America's allies, which are going to turn on us, which are going to turn, not on us, but, turn on Babylon the Great, So this is all biblical prophecy. Let me see if I can grab that real quick. Yeah, I think it's Revelation 17. All right. All right, so let me go back to these scriptures real quick. All right, this is Revelation 17 and 16. And it says, and the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, all right, the whore being Babylon the Great, America, all right, USA, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. All right, so our allies, which ones is to be, to be seen. All right, but the scriptures do tell us, that, ultimately our allies are going to turn on us, all right, and contribute to the destruction of Babylon the Great, So without further ado, I want to play a compilation of videos, that I came across that basically give a explanation of Swift, all right, and it shows how they're using this whole situation to move us to, all right, this NWO, okay? And don't think for a second that, Putin is not in on this, all right, and not involved, because he is, all right? So, Lord willing, it's clear, and this video is edifying. With that, I'll say shalom.
Well, I think what we're doing and executing on a day-by-day basis is, in fact, taking over SWIFT. In that, we've now signed up, well over 100 banks. Some of the largest SWIFT-enabled banks in the world are now using Ripple's technology. Just last week, we saw a remittance company who's using Ripple's technology. They reduced the price per transaction to their consumers from $20 per transaction to $2 per transaction, and they saw an 800% increase in usage overnight. That's the type of dynamic that Swift isn't able to support that we're able to address right now. And that's something we saw just in the last couple of weeks. So we certainly want to see banks succeed in this new world order. And take advantage of these technologies. To the extent we can work with Swift to do that, then that's great. Well, I think what we're doing and executing on a day-by-day.
Joined now by producer Kay Pritzker. Kay, we were speaking as an In Question team and talking about the fact that Swift's been all over the news lately in lots of headlines, but people might not have an idea of what exactly this organization is. So can you just start by explaining what is Swift?
Yeah, so Swift is a private financial messaging service that's based in Belgium, and what that means is it facilitates the international financial transactions of most of the world. There are a bunch of different systems like Swift, but Swift is by far the most popular. It serves 11,000 financial institutions in over 200 countries, and basically when anyone wants to buy or sell something internationally, Swift is the one that takes the payment information or the destination that the money is going to and makes sure that money reaches the right place in a secure fashion. And this replaced the Telex system, which was basically Swift before Swift, and this system did the same thing, but it was much slower, and it didn't have a standardized universal code system like Swift does, so Swift was kind of an improvement on this outdated system.
Swift claims it's a neutral institution. Is that true?
No, so Swift definitely isn't neutral. Anyone can say that, but their actions have kind of shown the opposite. So starting off in 2006, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and LA Times released a series of articles in June that showed that the United States actually had a system called this Terrorist Finance Tracking Program. And this program allowed the CIA and the U.S. Treasury to have backdoor access to Swift's database. So this gives them unprecedented access to, the world's financial transactions, who's sending what where, and this was done under the guise of stopping terrorism, which is the U.S.'s excuse for a lot of things, but this was obviously a violation of a lot of people's sovereignty, and it shows that Swift was willing to work with the CIA, with U.S. intelligence, as early as 2006, so that seems fairly unbiased. But up until this point, Swift had never banned anyone from their system, but that changed in 2012 when Swift banned Iran from their system. So as you can see, around 2012, Iran's nuclear program, their sovereign nuclear program, came into question, and a lot of people were calling for sanctions, and sanctions had been passed, but the Senate Banking Committee wanted to accelerate that process. So instead of sanctioning Iran further, they sanctioned Swift, and they wanted to force Swift to pull Iran from the system. Swift kind of hesitated to do this until March of 2012 when the European Union passed a bylaw stating that Swift had to do the same thing. Swift complied, and this really cut Iran off from a lot of its oil revenue because they could no longer sell oil freely on the market because their payments wouldn't go through.
Purely because the United States said so.
Exactly. They just tapped them on the shoulder, pressured them with sanctions, and countries like Iran were devastated by that. It's the main reason why Iran came to the negotiating table on the Iran nuclear deal.
But Iran's not the only country the United States has pressured Swift to punish, right?
Yeah,
North Korea also?
North Korea, this was during a period when President Trump was really ratcheting up the war drums, saying, Rocket Man was condemning these nuclear tests and was threatening nuclear war. A part of that was telling Swift to remove North Korea from their system, and that also happened. Swift was threatened, and Swift removed North Korean banks from the system, and that's been a strategy to pressure North Korea, is to strangle it economically and cut it off from foreign capital.
So you've just broken down 3 different cases in which Swift went along with U.S. foreign policy, without sort of any independent acting here, but I want to move on to this final question because we don't have a lot of time left. Countries like Iran and Russia, as well as the EU, are saying, look, maybe it's time to look for an alternative to SWIFT. What alternatives are out there, and why would it assist these countries?
Including in America's arsenal are a variety of sanctions which would be slapped on Russian financial institutions, along with another move which many are calling the nuclear option, cutting off SWIFT. For our top story tonight, here is RT's Alex Mihailovich.
A Russian troop buildup on Russian soil has much of the Western world singing the same song. A Russian invasion of Ukraine is imminent. Moscow has said time and time again that it has no plans of invading its neighbor, but that hasn't stopped the U.S. and its friends from plotting against the superpower.
Let me be clear about a couple of things. The sanctions that we put together include a number of things that we have not done in the past.
Some of the options against Russia that are said to be on the table are sanctions aimed at members of Putin's inner circle, Russian energy companies, and the country's financial sector. At the heart of the possible financial sanctions list lies the so-called nuclear option, cutting Russia off from SWIFT, the Belgian-based system of financial payments that moves money among more than 11,000 banks worldwide. SWIFT stands for Society of Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunications. The system has been around since 1973, and despite its efforts to be apolitical, it has been dragged into diplomatic tussles on occasion. In this case, some want to cut Russia off from SWIFT to make it difficult for the country to trade with others in the international community in hopes of laying a blow to the Russian economy.
You should be clear that the sanctions that we have prepared will be absolutely devastating, and that there is 100% unity between the United States and our allies that they will be imposed should he move, and he knows it.
However, the reality is that making threats is easier than implementing harsh sanctions on a big player in the world economy. There is potential for spillover if new sanctions are imposed against Moscow, meaning other unintended targets could fall victim to the effort. Most likely, removing Russia from SWIFT would hurt America's allies in Europe, cutting them off from vital Russian imports such as oil, gas, and metals. Also, these days when it comes to SWIFT, it's not the only player in town. Several countries, including Russia, have developed their own financial messaging systems. This would allow Russian financial firms to maintain communications with others in the world.
Evolving story with Russia, Ukraine invading Ukraine. Now, this is at face value, or at surface level, it seems as though, oh, well, this is kind of a no-brainer. Why don't they do that? They'll teach Russia a lesson. And I actually tweeted out earlier, I said it would surprise me if Putin or whoever is advising him would not have thought of this, and therefore they have a plan. But the more I think about it, the more I think their plan is leverage. Because if the European Union, or if the ECB, the Fed, whatever banks are involved with the SWIFT payment system, I know it's in Belgium, I believe, but it was set up by the banks. Whichever group decides that they want to exim from Russia out of the payment system, they would also be cutting out all of Russia's trading partners. Now, obviously not when they're trading with other countries, but then they would not be able to get any of the goods or materials from Russia. So it doesn't just affect Russia. Like I said, it affects every single one of their trading partners. And then they look around and say, well, wait a minute, who's trading with Russia and how much do we depend on them? And it would be very similar to the United States cutting off China from the SWIFT payment system. That would not be good for the United States.
What I'm more concerned about, and Christy may have been alluding to this, is we may get a stark division between countries. We will have a certain number of countries that will use a certain system, and other countries in the world that will use others. If that's what happens, that gives a boost to crypto, frankly, which is borderless, not necessarily interested in any of these systems, and so that actually will go ahead and give a lot of credence to Ripple, Stellar, and other types of crypto-related, monetary transactional systems.
Brazil, China, Russia, India, South Africa. These are nations that look at themselves as being vitally important on the world stage, and yet are completely dependent on the US dollar, and therefore the carrot and stick analogy applies here. We give you a carrot if you're good, says the US, or we give you the stick if you're bad, in the form of sanctions, right? And so these countries have decided we're not going to be subjected to sanctions anytime the West, or specifically the United States, wants to punish us. And the only way to do that is to break their dependency on the global system and the dollar as the world's reserve currency. Step two is what's being discussed now, which is the payment processing system. So really what they're competing with is the SWIFT bank system, right? So right now, if you're you're sending money overseas from a U.S. bank, you have to use, or any Western country, you use that SWIFT system that is set up in Belgium. And that prevents money laundering in theory and all that kind of thing. But what the BRICS nations are doing is saying, well, we don't need to use the SWIFT system because we don't want to be subjected again to U.S. sanctions, because if the U.S. is sanctioning you, you can't move money using that SWIFT system. So what's really interesting is, number one, they're creating a payment system that would go around SWIFT. But how do you do that when you have 5 major countries that all have their own currencies? And one of the ways they're doing that is by using possibly cryptocurrency to do that. That would translate their currencies into a single cryptocurrency that is then used through the system and then formulated, I guess, when it gets into their country, back into their own personal currency. So essentially, you're taking currency from one, sending it through as a cryptocurrency, and then back on the other end into transforming it into another currency. And that allows them, again, to get around this SWIFT system in a way that no one had really thought about in the past, because crypto already has all of those things in place.
Do if they were cut off from SWIFT?
I think the most important thing that they will do, forget about what they have to do. What they will do is certainly trade tit for tat, or more importantly, or more likely, punch for punch. And I think that taking this measure regarding SWIFT, which has never been taken, although it's been taken in the past, making SWIFT a political, hot potato or point of, exchange, it's never been done to this extent before, and certainly not to a country that is not clearly, in the eyes of everybody else in the world, a bad actor. It's been done in the case of Iran, which I think people will wholly agree is a bad actor in a lot of situations. Russia, not so much so in this situation. Sorry, to go back to your point, however, Farron, what they will have to do is they will have to find a workaround. And although Russia will say that there won't be that much disruption because there are other, methods other than SWIFT, the CIPS, and so forth, frankly, I don't think that that's the case. I think it's going to be difficult for them. I think they're currently working about, alternatives. But certainly, I think that for Russia, it'll be easier for them to find an alternative for financial transactions than it is going to be if they strike the other blow, which is going to be to cut off Europe from natural gas.
So then my question to you, Christy, SWIFT is the largest financial transcommunication system in the world. You just saw it there on the screen, the bullet points, Ron. But are there other options? We've heard of cross-payment border systems like Ripple. Do you think the future of all of this is ultimately going to be deregulation, you think?
I wouldn't get there that fast. I mean, Ripple and Stellar are still, very much interested in being in the good graces of the United States. So I don't think they're going to go ahead and, facilitate Russia's, runaround of the U.S. sanctions. So I don't think they're going to go ahead and, facilitate Russia's, runaround of the U.S. sanctions. So I don't think they're going to go ahead and, facilitate Russia's, runaround of the U.S. sanctions.
So we certainly want to see banks succeed in this New World Order.
I think this is really big. So this is a document from the Atlantis Press. It's called Foreign and Russian Experience of Blockchain Digitization by Central Banks, Financial and Technology Companies. This is from the Second International Scientific and Practical Conference entitled Modern Management Trends in the Digital Economy from Regional Development to Global Economic Growth. We can see the authors here as well. It's getting into a lot of the different mechanisms going on with crypto right now, with who's building on blockchain, what proof of concepts are occurring, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I'm not going to waste anybody's time here. I'm going to get right into this. They do talk about what Swift GPI is doing and the trials within that. Deutsche Börse, Microsoft, Paxos, German Commerzbank, Wells Fargo, Spain, Santander, et cetera, et cetera. We know Santander is obviously RippleNet. This is what's really interesting, and this is why I'm doing this video right now. I'll read this very, very slow. I might read certain portions of it again because it's actually absolutely gigantic in my opinion. All right, one of the toolkit projects based on the mechanisms of blockchain technology was the Bank of Russia, so the central bank in Russia, the Bank of Russia's project on the cross-border transfers implementation. Now, this was in the first half of 2018 where this trial occurred. The Bank of Russia's Novosibirsk Innovative Laboratory So this is the bank's innovation laboratory, conducted research on the testing possibility of cross-border settlements using the Ripple platform. The system technology assumed that the settlement participants had special accounts open in national payment systems and addresses in the Ripple network. That's a very interesting statement to me right there. The system technology assumed that the settlement participants, which I would assume are banks, had special accounts opened in national payment systems and addresses in the Ripple network. So those technology rails within RippleNet, within the banking ecosystem, exist, or at least that assumption was made from the proof of concept that was going on here. Reflection of operations in national payment systems could be performed both after each transfer and at the end of the trading day or at certain intervals. Now this is important. Based on the research results conducted by the Central Bank of Russia through their innovation laboratory, it was concluded that the Ripple platform can be considered as the basis for starting work on creating a system of cross-border settlements, provided that the following organizational, legal, and technical issues are resolved. The first bullet point here is the use of XRP transfers or equivalents of fiat currencies issued by each participant, the national bank. Which equivalents of fiat currencies would be issued by national bank participants? I would think that that might be a CBDC type thing we're dealing in here. We have the Central Bank of Russia, through their innovation lab, literally saying that this proof of concept was successful, literally saying that the Ripple platform can be considered as the basis for starting work on creating a system of cross-border settlements, literally stating that the assumption made is that there were special accounts already opened in national payment systems and addresses within the Ripple network, literally saying that the use for XRP transfers or equivalents of fiat currencies issued by each participant would need to be hashed out, and I believe that that deals in CBDCs, which would be issued by the national bank.
Nations around the world, all modern nations around the world, have the same debt-based system. That debt-based system, first of all, it's a curse. It's a curse upon the world that we've allowed to manifest. It's astonishing to me, think about it, that the people of the world have allowed private institutions to run the global financial system. We've just given it away. We've literally given it away. And what this has done is create a slave planet. A slave planet. Slave individuals. That's what they do. Central banks are on a mission to create slaves. Nation slaves, individual slaves to debt. Debt. They are one product, and they are more than happy to issue more and more and more debt in any amount, just to keep the system going, to keep power concentrated within central banks. People, I told you this a million times. We got to get rid of these institutions. You know, George Gammon gave me that hat. He knows what's going on here. Central banks are the biggest threat to the world at this particular time. People, how many times have you heard this guy explain to you that you are going to see things that you are not going to believe moving forward? Let's quote, that's exactly what I've said. As central banks create more reasons to borrow cash into existence. The entire world is a stage. The entire world is a chessboard, okay? And central banks work in concert with supposed world leaders to create events like we are seeing over there right now to allow central banks to do what they're doing. And that is, it's a global takeover. Don't lose sight on the bigger picture here, that people are dying and people are suffering, and none of this is by accident, people. It's a terrible thing, the world we live in today, and I think the powers that run it all, the central banks, they have a lot more in store for all of us. So anyway, people, surging energy prices, this is just the beginning. okay? I've been covering this at length for a very long time. This is going to play right into this global inflationary event that we are currently in, and you haven't seen anything yet. I've been using those exact words. You haven't seen anything yet for a very long time. So what we're seeing right now, people, you should expect all of this. You should have expected it. I tell you all the time, expect things that you can't even believe to come down the pike. But this is all part of the grand plan. This is a global takeover of central banks. They're taking over the world. Over the freaking world. And they will use any mechanism possible to make it happen. If they have to twist world leaders, cause them to do things, all of them, okay? I'm talking about Frankenstein, Bidenstein, Putin, all these freaking people, they're all puppets. If you believe for a nanosecond that, again, the world is run by presidents, dictators, monarchs, whoever, then you are sincerely deluded. You have no idea what's going on here. Central banks control the entire global monetary system, which means they rule the freaking world. Okay? They're the ones pulling the strings. They are the puppet masters, and people are suffering at the behest of these institutions and the Fed and all central banks. Okay? That's where we stand. And you people, again, look, if you think what's coming down the pike, if you think you know what's coming down the pike, amplify that by tenfold, and maybe you're in the right spot. And I hope you're ready. I really, really do. We're going to see things that you can't believe moving forward, and they're going to throw things at us that are going to shock us all.